Welcome to Money Talk. I'm your host, Skylar Fleming. Money Talk is a podcast where we talk about money. This podcast is a place for me to be able to share what I learn and enjoy about personal finance. Here, you'll learn something about everything from budgeting to retiring. Let's get into today's episode. Thank you for tuning into Money Talk. Let's keep talking about savings funds, specifically the sinking fund today. Let's talk about what a sinking fund is, when you use them, how you can best utilize them, why they're beneficial, why they can be detrimental, and then the grand finale of the episode will be getting to meet my wife and hear her take on the sinking fund. Let's get into talking about what a sinking fund is. The sinking fund can go by many names. You can call it a leftover fund, your remaining budget fund. Basically, it is saving through budgeting. A sinking fund is where you take your leftover budget and set it aside for a specific category. If you think about the idea, I bet you can start to think of a lot of ways you could use a sinking fund. There are a lot of ways, and let's talk about some of those. When do you use a sinking fund, or what are some of the ways that you can use one? Well, you can use one all of the time. Rebecca and I have been using them for over a year, and they have came in very handy when we need to make a larger than normal purchase. There are a lot of ways that they can be used. One month we knew we were going to have a lot of expenses and things we wanted to do, but we had no worry about spending the money because we had been casually saving for months. One month, I bought a new Xbox, we went camping, we had to pay for 6 months worth of car insurance, my motorcycle registration was due. These could easily have been expenses that broke the bank and made us carry a balance on our credit card for an extra month while we had to get the money to pay them off. But because we had sinking funds in place for our budget categories, we were able to very easily cover the expenses as they came up and the wants that came up. Another time that a sinking fund was well used when I wanted to go to an NBA playoff game. Tickets for sporting events, especially playoff games, are not cheap, but because we are continually saving our sinking fund, it was not a big deal. Now let's talk about some of the other ways that you could use a sinking fund beyond the stories that I just told. You know what holiday is about to sneak up on millions of people again? Christmas. It happens every year, but somehow people are always surprised and it catches them by surprise and their bank accounts by surprise. Christmas is the same day every single year. Sinking funds are a great resource to use towards Christmas. Really, they can be used towards gift giving of any type. Birthdays also happen the same time every year. Paying for gifts would be a lot easier if you were setting aside money every month, even in the months that you don't spend on gifts. That way, on the months that you do have a lot of gifts, where that's all you're buying, you have plenty of money set aside to spend on gifts. Vacations are another perfect example of a place a sinking fund can be used. Now, obviously, a sinking fund in this instance looks a lot more like a savings plan, but the goal should be to budget every dollar you have. So if you make a plan and budget money towards vacation, then you're creating a sinking fund. Then when your vacation rolls around, you easily have enough money to pay for everything, and you even have a little bit extra, most likely to act as a little bit of a vacation emergency fund. Now, another great place for a sinking fund is car repairs. Like I said last week with having an emergency fund, your car repair budget can become a bit of a small emergency fund. And I'm going to have Rebecca tell a little bit about this story and our situation with car repairs and using a sinking fund for car repairs in a little bit. Another great way a sinking fund can be used is to cover those higher than normal utility bills. I'm sure like most people, they find themselves with a higher electricity bill in the summer, but if you're trying to budget every single dollar like you should be, when you have a little bit left over, you can throw it into your utilities budget. Then when those higher than normal summer electricity bills roll around, you easily have enough money to cover those higher than normal bills, and you don't have to worry. As you can see, there are a lot of ways that a sinking fund can be used. I'm sure you thought of some while listening to me tell about how I've used them in my life. Now, there are some tips and tricks to using a sinking fund and how you can use it best. Let's talk about that next. So how do you best utilize the sinking fund? Well, you have to make sure you're saving money, obviously. You can't be spending every dollar you make. You have to learn to live below your means in order to make a sinking fund useful and helpful. If you're spending every dollar you have, then you're just going to find yourself with sinking funds at $0 or negative all the time. So let's go through some of the steps to make sure that your sinking fund is set up and that you can start implementing them into your financial journey. So the first step is to make sure that you have a budget and that you're budgeting every single month. My wife and I like to budget based off of last month's income. This makes it really nice as we already know how much money we're going to have to spend for the month. I believe this is a crucial first point in the early stages of financial independence. It means you're independent from every single paycheck and that you're not worrying every 2 weeks where your paychecks are. Step 2 is that you need to figure out the categories you need to save for. Like, what can you use your sinking fund for? Can you use it for vacations, car repair, gifts, and every other category really? But you need to make sure that you figure out which ones you're going to use it for. Once you figure out what you plan to save towards, you can start budgeting your money to save towards those items. The third step is that you need to regularly budget every dollar you can, especially if you don't plan to spend it. That's the whole point of a sinking fund, to budget the money you don't plan to spend to be able to spend it later down the road when you do need it for those wants and unexpected expenses that come up every now and then. Step 4 is to make sure to set that money aside. Open up a specific savings account that has easy access like your emergency fund. Then take the money that is left over each month, move it into that savings account. That way, when you have to tap into your sinking fund, you can easily move money out of that account because it's easy to access like your emergency fund. Make sure that you can access this money within a few business days. Step 5 is the fun part. You get to spend all that extra money that you've been saving. So when the time comes to use your sinking fund, just spend the money. Then when you need to transfer the extra over from your sinking fund, transfer it into your spending or clearing account. If you use a credit card and pay it off every month, then you can just transfer all the extra that you need from the sinking fund into your checking account before the credit card payment comes out. It's really easy to keep track of, but you have to make sure to keep track of it. You need to keep it in a spreadsheet or a list of some sort so you know how much is in each sinking fund. Then make sure to deduct from it what you use. That way you have an idea of how much you can use towards those extra purchases. If you don't keep track, you should be able to see that you can easily lose track of the money and fall back into the habit of spending more than you actually have. So now let's talk about some of the benefits of a sinking fund. So the benefits of a sinking fund are many. I've noticed that quite a few times in my year or so using them. Like I said, I got to go to an NBA game, and those tickets aren't cheap, and my wife and I don't make enough money to just be throwing it around like that. But because our recreation budget has money allotted to it every month, we were able to have enough saved in that sinking fund that buying the tickets to the game was no worry. There was no stress at all surrounding the purchase because we had the money set aside before. Another benefit is that if you have a variable income, say you make more in the summer months than the winter months, and your summer months is enough to cover the charges in the winter, then you could use a sinking fund to break down your income to help stretch it out over all the months when you need it. And you need money all the time, so you need to make sure that you're saving when you're earning more in certain months to cover those months that you're not making as much. Another benefit of the sinking fund has really nothing to do with the sinking fund itself, but the behavioral aspect of money. It gets you thinking about future expenses. When you sit down and plan how you want to use a sinking fund, it helps you realize that you have upcoming expenses. So there's less surprise when the car registration email or postcard shows up. You knew it was coming, so a sinking fund and budgeting using a sinking fund benefits you beyond saving money. Now, sinking funds aren't always perfect. There are some drawbacks that can happen with a sinking fund if you're not careful with it. So there are two main big drawbacks to a sinking fund. The first one being too many sinking funds. You can really use a sinking fund for every single category in your budget, but this can get pretty hectic if you are not careful and keep good track of your money. Do you really need a sinking fund for donations and stuff like that? Probably not, but you can likely plan those ahead of time and have a plan in place for those. But if you have too many sinking funds, it can get very confusing and you can begin to lose track of money, because it starts to add up, which is the second issue. The second issue is having too many sinking funds, and the account can grow quite large over time, large enough that you should probably have the money invested. This is something that you have to be very careful about. Like your emergency fund, you should have it in a high-yield savings account once it gets to any sort of a sizable amount. If it gets very large, you could certainly look to invest it in an index fund, since you probably won't need it all at once, and you can just let the account grow. So now for the part that everybody came for, let's meet my wife Rebecca and let's hear her opinion on the sinking fund. I know she enjoys them and actually appreciates that we use them. So she has an interesting take on how we use a sinking fund, especially surrounding car repair. So let's meet Rebecca. I mentioned in my first episode that you will likely get to hear some from my wife on different money topics. Her and I are very diligent when it comes to talking about money, mostly because I talk about money too much, but we have developed our plan and put it into action. This plan includes sinking funds, which Rebecca likes a lot. But before I have her share her experience with sinking funds and talk about her car a little bit, let's get to meet Rebecca. All right, Rebecca, go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
All right, so my name is Rebecca. I'm married to Skylar, the host of this podcast, and he's pretty great. But a little bit about myself: I grew up in a small town in southern Alberta, Canada. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. I graduated from Utah State University with a bachelor's degree in human biology, and I am applying for PA school to become a physician's assistant. Other than that, I like to swim and take naps.
Okay, Rebecca, now let's get into the topic of this episode that I brought you on to speak about. So what are your thoughts about the sinking fund? I've already introduced what they are. The audience knows what they are and have some ways they can best utilize them. But what are your thoughts on a sinking fund?
So I like the sinking funds, honestly. I'm pretty frugal, I would say. I don't like to spend tons of money, but I like to save lots of money. But even when I save money, sometimes I have trouble spending it. So I like the sinking funds a lot because it allows us to categorize our money into different funds, different categories for expenses, and it allows us to save monthly for those different expenses. So when the time comes, let's say I want to go shopping with my sister and my mom or something, and I can look in the clothing sinking fund and see how much money is there. And so I've already saved and prepared to be able to go shopping and spend some money with my mom and my sister. So then I feel less guilty about spending the money because we have been saving for it, and it's not an unexpected expense that just pops up one day and throws off our budget, since we can budget for it regularly.
Yeah, can you imagine how I can't even think about how we would handle stuff like that if we didn't have sinking funds, because we've been using them for so long.
Especially with gifts. Like, people have birthdays or Christmas is coming up, and instead of Christmas being a sudden expensive season of buying gifts for everyone that you weren't planning for or preparing for, we can budget all year long to save up money for those things.
Yeah, like I got Rebecca an Apple Watch for her birthday, and I mean, that's not a cheap purchase for most people, especially our age. Like I mentioned earlier in the podcast with my jazz tickets, we don't make the kind of money that we can just throw that kind of money at things, huh? Mm-hmm. So yeah, the sinking funds allowed us to be able to save up over time. And like she said with shopping, or like I said earlier with buying an Xbox, we're able to keep money in certain categories, and it really helps us a lot. I would say it's way more beneficial than it is detrimental.
Yeah, and I also we over budget on our rent specifically, and so our rent's $875 a month, let's say, and we will purposely budget more every single month, so some of that will build up in our sinking funds, so when we end up needing to move and paying a security deposit on a new apartment, we don't have to scrape by looking for $900 or whatever we need, because we have been saving for it. That when that time comes.
Honestly, that's probably one of the best ways we've been using it, and we haven't even got to the point where we've had to use that. But it's super nice because we've almost have enough in there to pay for a month's rent. But yeah, there's a lot of other categories that are great. Like I mentioned, yearly subscriptions we use Disney Plus for. You like your vacation sinking fund?
I do love my vacation sinking fund.
Yeah, so Rebecca's excited that we get to go to Hawaii when she graduates PA school.
And we're slowly saving for it, little by little every month.
That and budgeting on college expenses to pay for PA school. So
yes, that for sure.
Yeah, we've learned that there's a lot of ways you can use a sinking fund. But next, we're going to have Rebecca talk about her car and how we use a sinking fund to repair her car and possibly get a car in the future.
So my car is a 2001 Toyota Corolla, and her name is Loretta. And she is my first car. I love her dearly. I've had her for about 3 years. And she doesn't have a ton of miles on her. When I first got her, it was like 124,000. So for a 2001, that's pretty good. And I love my car. She's got some quirks, broken handles, broken mirrors, all this, that, and the other. But she runs and she gets me to where I need to go. Now, the thing about her, because she is older, sometimes things break. And that sucks because I don't want Loretta to die. I will probably cry when she dies. She's like my firstborn child.
You did cry when she didn't pass emissions.
Yeah, so she didn't pass emissions, and I was pretty upset because her check engine light was on. And so that's kind of where the good thing came in with the sinking fund. We have a sinking fund for car repairs. And so since we've been saving money up in our sinking fund for car repairs, we had some money set aside to put into trying to fix Loretta so she could pass emissions. So we were able to fix one thing, didn't work, fix another thing, didn't work, and instead of being panicked and having these car repair expenses and not having the money for it, we were already prepared for this because we had been saving in our sinking fund. And do you have something to say about it, Skylar?
Yeah, she's still struggling, has her issues, but after you finish what you were going to say, eventually Loretta's going to die, so you're going to have to face that grim reality, but talk about what we do with our sinking fund after that happens.
I know, Loretta will die one day, and I don't like to think about it, but the thing with the sinking fund, as much as it is our car repair fund, as we continue to contribute money to it, we can not only prepare for car repairs, but we can slowly start saving to buy me a new Loretta when Loretta, the original, dies. And so that's nice, and we know that her death is coming. And so we have started contributing more to our car repair sinking fund than we may have previous, so that we can start preparing for that expense and not be stuck in a hole when she dies and we don't have money for a new car.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. It really keeps us out of the ditch and helps us be able to think about it better, especially like you said with clothing purchases. A car repair is even bigger of a deal. I can't imagine if everything started going out and we're like, where's the money? How are we going to pay for all this? But that was never a worry because of our sinking funds. But do you have anything else you want to add about sinking funds, Rebecca?
Use them if you can. We've had to fine tune our categories, so when you're first starting, you might not know which categories you need to create, but as you stick with it, you'll be able to know which categories you need for your sinking funds, and it really will bring you a lot of peace of mind when it comes to your unexpected expenses or even just preparing for fun future expenses.
Yeah, that's true. And you'll realize some categories probably should be broken down into other ones. So we have like our main other category that eventually almost gets expanded into other categories if we notice something specific. And then you can always move money between sinking funds. Like you can move it from your car repair if that's getting too big to your clothing if you know you're going to need that soon. But thanks for coming on the podcast, Rebecca.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me.
I would say I need you on every week, but that would defeat the purpose of the podcast for me to not be able to tell you about money so often.
Well, and that's the funny thing. I also want to support you and listen to your podcast, but that also defeats the purpose. So we'll see.
It was all part of my grand plan to get her to listen to me when I talk about money instead of fall asleep.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode about sinking funds. I hope you learned some more about them and that you were able to gain some ideas on how you can use a sinking fund. I think they are a great tool, especially when it comes to learn how to start small towards saving money. They help you break the habit of spending beyond your means and help you start thinking about your future and future spending. Please leave a review on whatever podcast app you are listening on. They help tremendously. Also in the show notes, you can find a link to be able to send me a voice message. I would love to be able to hear from my listeners any questions they have or comments they have about the show. Thanks for listening to this week's episode.